You weren't daddy's little girl. You were his emotional spouse, his unpaid therapist, his reason to stay functional, and nobody ever called it abuse. Let me be specific about what this looked like. You were 10, maybe 12, sitting at the kitchen table while he told you things no child should hear. His marriage problems, his work stress, how your mother didn't understand him, and you felt chosen, special, like you possessed some magical ability to fix him that nobody else had. That wasn't closeness. That was covert incest, and the term sounds extreme until you understand what it actually means. Not sexual abuse, but something that violates boundaries just as profoundly. It's called spousification in clinical literature. When a parent uses their child to meet emotional needs that should be fulfilled by adult relationships, they're committing a form of psychological boundary violation that reshapes your entire nervous system. You became his regulator, his comfort object, the person responsible for his emotional stability, at an age when your brain was supposed to be learning how to be a child. I watched this pattern destroy someone I knew for 30 years before she could name it. She described her father as her best friend growing up. They had inside jokes. He called her his confidant. When her parents fought, he'd find her afterward and explain his side, detail by detail, teaching her to see him as the victim. She felt like the only person who truly understood him. What she didn't realize until her second divorce was that she'd been trained systematically to prioritize a man's emotional state over her own, to read micro-expressions for signs of disappointment, to shape-shift her personality to keep someone else regulated. She learned to scan rooms for tension, adjust her laughter, soften her opinions before speaking them aloud. Her father never hit her, never screamed. He just made her responsible for his happiness, and that responsibility became the blueprint for every romantic relationship she'd ever have. She chose partners who needed managing, who required constant emotional translation, who made her feel purposeful through their instability. Here's what makes emotional incest so insidious. It disguises itself as preference. Your father chose you for special trips, one-on-one dinners, long talks that went past your bedtime. You felt selected, elevated above your siblings, above your mother. He'd say things like, "You're so mature for your age," or "I can talk to you about things I can't discuss with anyone else." And you internalized that as evidence of your worth. But let's reframe that with clinical precision. What he was actually doing was parentification, a term coined by family therapist Ivan Basarmeni-Nagy in 1965 to describe role reversal between parent and child. When you were supposed to be developing your own identity, your own needs, your own emotional language, you were instead learning his, absorbing his anxiety, managing his emotional volatility. That's not a developmental stage, that's a derailment. And it doesn't show up on your body like bruises. It shows up decades later when you can't say no without feeling like you're killing someone. You want the neuroscience? Here it is. A 2017 study published in Development and Psychopathology found that children who experience parentification show altered cortisol patterns and hyperactivation in the anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for error detection and emotional regulation of others. Your brain literally rewired itself to prioritize monitoring someone else's emotional state over processing your own. That's why you can walk into a room and immediately sense tension, read the micro-expressions flickering across faces, decode the slight edge in someone's voice. Why you can predict someone's mood shift before they speak, sometimes before they even fully feel it themselves. It's not intuition, it's hypervigilance, and it came at a cost. While your peers were developing secure attachment, learning that their needs mattered, experimenting with boundaries and hearing the word no without catastrophizing, you were learning that love equals service. That closeness means fusion, that your value is measured by your ability to absorb someone else's pain. Let's talk about what this does to your romantic relationships, because this is where the pattern reveals itself with surgical precision. You choose partners who need fixing, who have potential, who are emotionally unavailable in ways that feel familiar, almost comfortable. You're drawn to men who remind you of that dynamic where you felt special because you were needed. And here's the trap: you mistake intensity for intimacy. The same way your father's emotional dependency felt like closeness, you interpret a partner's neediness as depth. You don't know how to connect without a crisis to solve, without someone's emotional weather to predict and manage. So you end up in relationships that exhaust you, wondering why you can't just find someone easy, someone stable. But stable feels boring, foreign, like there's no role for you to play, because you were never taught that you could be loved for simply existing. You were taught that love is earned through emotional labor. Now here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. You probably still defend him. When someone suggests your father's behavior was inappropriate, you feel this surge of protectiveness. He was just close with me. He was a good dad. He was lonely. You make excuses because calling it what it was means reclassifying your entire childhood. It means admitting that the thing you thought made you special was actually the thing that stole your childhood. And that's terrifying. Because if you weren't special, if you were just being used, then who are you? This is called cognitive dissonance, and it's why so many adult children of enmeshed parents can't break the pattern. Accepting the truth requires grieving the fantasy. It requires rage, and you were never allowed to be angry at him. Your job was to understand him, comfort him, manage him, so instead you turn that anger inward. You blame yourself for failed relationships, for your inability to set boundaries, for the exhaustion that comes from being everyone's emotional support system. She finally started to unravel it in therapy at 37. The turning point came when her therapist asked a simple question. When was the last time you told your father no without apologizing? She couldn't answer. She'd never told him no, not when he called at midnight needing to vent, not when he asked invasive questions about her relationships, not when he made subtle comments about feeling abandoned when she couldn't visit. She'd spent 37 years managing his feelings, and the idea of prioritizing her own felt like betrayal. Her therapist introduced her to the term emotional incest, and she wept for 3 sessions straight, not sad tears, angry ones, because suddenly all of it made sense, why she couldn't maintain boundaries, why she felt responsible for everyone's emotional state, why she kept choosing men who needed her more than they loved her. The special bond was a theft. And naming it was the beginning of getting herself back. Here's what recovery looks like, and I won't sugarcoat it. It's not about confronting your father, though some people do. It's about reparenting yourself, teaching your nervous system that you're allowed to have needs, that you can be loved without being useful, that other people's emotions are not your responsibility to manage. This means sitting with the guilt that comes when you set a boundary, that horrible visceral sensation that you're doing something wrong by saying no. You have to learn to tolerate that discomfort without rushing to fix it. You have to practice being unavailable, letting calls go to voicemail, saying I can't talk right now without explaining why, choosing a partner who doesn't need you to fix them even though that lack of crisis feels destabilizing at first. You have to grieve the childhood you didn't get, the one where you were allowed to be selfish, messy, needy, where your father's emotional stability wasn't your job, and then you have to build a new identity. Let me be clear about something that might make you uncomfortable. Your father may never acknowledge what he did. He may never apologize. He may continue to see himself as the devoted dad who had a special relationship with his daughter. And you don't need his validation to heal. You don't need him to understand the harm to stop letting it control you. This is the hardest part for people to accept. We want the person who hurt us to recognize the hurt, to feel remorse, to release us from the guilt. But emotional incest thrives in invisible spaces. It's not legally actionable. It's not socially recognized. Most people will hear your story and say he sounds like a great dad. What's the problem? The problem is that you can't be in a relationship without abandoning yourself. The problem is that you feel responsible for everyone's happiness except your own. The problem is that the word no feels like violence in your mouth, and you're the only one who can change that. So where does this leave you? With a choice. You can continue carrying the weight of his emotional needs, telling yourself it's love, wondering why your relationships keep failing and your boundaries keep dissolving. Or you can name what happened, call it what it was: emotional incest, parentification, a violation of developmental boundaries that taught you love means losing yourself. You can start the messy, uncomfortable work of building a self that exists independently of someone else's needs. Of learning that you matter even when you're not useful. That closeness doesn't require fusion, that you can love your father and still acknowledge he harmed you. These two things can coexist, and the moment you stop defending the dysfunction is the moment you get your life back. But there's one more uncomfortable truth I haven't told you yet. In tomorrow's video, we'll explore why your mother knew what was happening and did nothing, the silent complicity that enabled your father's emotional dependence. Subscribe so you don't miss it. If this video resonated with you, hit subscribe. Uncomfortable Truths drops a new uncomfortable truth tomorrow and every day after on personal finance, relationships, mindset, and productivity, and more. Turn on notifications so you're first to see it. The truth is uncomfortable, but it's always worth it.